Hi and welcome to the ANZAC Day special. ANZAC Day in Australia and New Zealand commemorates the British Empire invasion of Turkey on April 25th, 1915. It was a mistake to a lot of people. It was poorly thought out. A naval battle was attempted the day before, and then the powers that be changed their mind, came back the next day with the army. So they had well and truly lost the element of surprise. The battle looms large for us Australians, and it's a little hard to know why, since it was definitely not a victory. It was a defeat, but it was a defeat that claimed a lot of lives on both sides. To me, one of the interesting things about the ANZAC legend that we're taught at school is that it's quite incomplete, and also, like most war legends, there's a demonification of the other side. But the fact is, Australia has been friends with Turkey since a treaty was signed in 1923, a year after the Republic of Turkey was formed. And other than getting a little bit testy about the invasion of Cyprus in 1973, relations have been very, very good ever since. It must be remembered that Australia has a very large Greek population, and so Greeks and Turks, pretty well since the Trojan War, they've not been on the best of terms. So for Australia, and growing up in Australia for a long time, the legend sort of painted the Turkish as a fairly bad bunch of people, and it's quite interesting to look at the facts, and it's very relevant. I just heard on the radio no more than 10 minutes ago that 4 New Zealand airmen have just died in a crash, and even to this day people from every country that choose to serve that country in the armed forces do die. That's something we should all remember. And I think without glorifying it, we need to remember the sacrifice. So what I've decided to do is do a real mix today, and I've been working on this recipe for a number of weeks, but what I've decided to do is bring in the whole of the ANZAC legend, or the whole of the ANZAC truth, as opposed to the legend. Legend tells us that it was a bunch of Australians and New Zealanders, and it certainly was. But the fact is that the forces that invaded on that day were made up of a large contingent of British, a large bunch of Aussies and Kiwis, but also 3 others that we should consider. And as I create this tea, I'm going to actually talk to you about that. So, now one of the most famous teas in Turkey is apple tea, and that is made in a variety of ways these days. It's often made with a powder. But it is a very, very interesting variation, and I've looked at quite a few recipes over the last few weeks. But basically, what we do is put some apples into this boiling water. That's all it is, boiling water. And now, as I mentioned, there were a lot of Australians there. There were a lot of Kiwis. 2,700 Kiwis lost their lives over the course of that campaign. And of all the Allied forces there, they actually got the furthest, though very, very briefly. So I'm actually going to add a kiwi fruit. Now, that's going to sound a little bit odd, but most recipes for apple tea actually have lemon in them, and I'm allergic to lemons. So what I found is I can cheat my way into getting that bit of acidity there by putting in some kiwi fruit. And also I've actually got some lemon thyme I picked from the garden, and an Australian lemon myrtle leaf. So there we go. So we've got some fruit bubbling away there. Now, who else was there? Because I wasn't taught in school there was anyone else there, but in fact it was a British Empire expeditionary force, and so consequently there were actually several battalions of Indian troops there. In fact, 1,370 Indians lost their lives at Gallipoli. So I'm going to put a couple of grams of this nice Assam tea in there. So 2 grams. And I'm also going to put a couple of grams of this tea from Ceylon, because there were also a bunch of guys from Ceylon, as part of the empire, over there, doing what they saw as their duty. And I'm going to also put a couple of grams of Australian Daintree tea. There we go. So that's all bubbling away there. And in actual fact, I'm going to cook that for about 15 minutes. So in a minute I'll be taking a break and then we'll come back. But I just want to tell you about someone I've left out. One of the interesting footnotes is that part of the invading forces were the Zionist Mule Corps. And the Zionist Mule Corps was a group of Jews who had donkeys. And what they did was they volunteered to carry the wounded. And it's quite an interesting concept because at the time they were very much looking for favour from the British. They wanted the breakup of Palestine to result in the Jewish state. And so they thought one of the ways to remain in the eyes of the British, and particularly the military, was to help out on the front line and carry the wounded. Now, I couldn't for the life of me come up with anything remotely Jewish to put in this tea. So I thought I'm just going to give these guys a mention. So that's boiling away there. I'll just turn that up a bit, but that's going to have 15 minutes. I've prepared my plate here of Turkish Delight and ANZAC biscuits. ANZAC biscuits are a wonderful Australian tradition. You make them very simply out of golden syrup and oats, a bit of flour, a bit of butter. Really, really nice biscuit, and I think the whole world knows what Turkish Delight is. So that's my ANZAC friendship platter. Now, often in Turkish tea you put honey, but I've actually decided to be a little bit more Australian and use this golden syrup. We love golden syrup here. It's fantastic on crumpets. Put it in there, just a good glug of that, a big tablespoonful. So now I'm going to take a break now, and I'm going to cook this and I'm going to come back, but in a minute some words are going to come across the screen. In Australia there's a traditional poem that we use on ANZAC Day, and everyone in Australia has heard it and knows it, and it's very emotive and often brings a tear to my eyes. But something I've found which I think is equally beautiful is from a memorial on the site erected by the Turks during Kemal Ataturk's reign, and it's also been replicated in the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. So I'm going to leave you with these beautiful words, and I'll be back in about 15 minutes time to show you what we're going to do with this very unusual ANZAC tea. Hi, welcome back. Now, if you've never made Turkish style tea before, you're probably thinking, did he say 15 minutes? And yes, I have been cooking this for 15 minutes. So it is a thick, black, over-steeped mess, as you'd expect. But that's the way this is done. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've just got a little jug here, and I'm going to decant this tea into that. So it's very thick and sludgy, and the amount of stuff that's left in the ibrick here is actually a lot more than the amount of liquid that's gone in. So I'll put that to one side. So what I have here is basically a highly concentrated tea. So I take my tea glass. Now, most people drinking this sort of concoction would probably put a lot of sugar in it. I put a little bit of syrup in to start with. I won't be adding sugar to mine, but I think traditionally sugar goes in there. So what we do is we put a serve of this extremely strong tea syrup in there, and we top it off with some boiling water. So there you go. A special tea, a special day, and drink this and reflect. And I'll see you next time.